Welcome to Resisting Beta, the men's health podcast. And now, your host, Andrew Bontz.
Welcome, men, to another episode of the Resisting Beta podcast. I am Andrew Bontz, the host here, and I feel privileged for this episode. I am talking to a gentleman that I've known since I was probably 20 years old, at least from a professional level, back when I was selling Cutco knives. And he was kind of a professional father figure to me and has had a huge impact on my life. And I am so excited to have him here to share his story with you, share some of the insight that I've gathered, knowing him for the time that we've known him. And here's some questions that I have. His name's Dave Durand. Here's some questions that I'll have for him that we'll get into in the episode. And we'll dive a little deeper in some areas and see where it flows. But what is the definition of success? Because his definition of success is what I use to gauge my life today. And I remember his speech at the seminars he would talk about at different conferences and kind of stuff as he explained this very, very apparently. And is there such a thing as life balance, especially when you are a CEO, a founder, an entrepreneur, or just a leader? Where as men, we tend to hustle a lot and define our value in this world by what we do professionally. And at times, the rest can come crashing down pretty fast. And if you're where you're at in your life through a divorce or a struggling marriage or a struggling relationship or had failed because of a lack of balance, I'd love to get into that topic. And how does all the different plates fit in? So a little bit about Dave. He was the CEO of Best Version Media. He just made a change there. And he's a radio personality. He was recognized by Glassdoor as the most respected CEO for three times. He's won Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year. He has decades of experience building and selling companies. Best Version Media, they have 17 million readers, one of the largest companies of its type in the world, I think. So, Dave, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
It's great to be with you, Andy, and it's good to see you so stably on your feet doing great things. I'm unsurprised by that.
Hey man, you changed my life when you reached out to me several years ago when I made the career change and was a publisher for Best Version Media at that time. So the impact you have had on me has been immense. So I'm excited to get a little bit of a gleam on the insight that you have shared with me over the years and see where this kind of goes in our new, more evolved and mature versions of ourselves a couple decades later.
How about that? I know, time flies. It's amazing. I'm amazed sometimes how fast it moves.
So tell the men a little bit about what you do and how you helped men in the past, and maybe a quick version of your story so we can understand who's Dave Durand.
Sure. I do a lot of work with men who are going through the struggle, and I think the best way to do that is as a peer, when you're working through things yourself too. I've built a lot of companies. I've had an opportunity to lead a lot of people in a lot of different ways and provide advice. I would say that the thing that when people ask, well, what are you most effective at? I don't think that I really tell people too many things they don't know. I think generally what I'm able to do is take the things that people know but maybe can't define or aren't usable and put them in terms that allow them to get more traction. So I think that's really what it is. And life is filled with ups and downs and suffering and glory and success and humility and all of the things that come into play. And when we understand and embrace that, we can really find joy in the whole thing. And at the end of the day, there has to be an existential understanding of what life is about, or we muddle through this thing with no meaning at all. And when we're unable to identify what that is, we have an anxiety about it. So I help people come to that level of understanding and conclusion.
How do you go about that when you're talking to men who are succeeding at what phase in their life? Because it seems like the men I've talked to, that they believe life is going to change when, or when I accomplish this, or when I become this, or grow this, or sell this, or reach this height, that's when fill in the blank. Like,
Yeah, I love that question. So there are really 4 levels of happiness, and we try to pursue these things. And there are people wiser, much wiser, as many people would know, Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, Thomas Aquinas, et cetera, who've spoken to these things, but I'll put them in simple terms. There are 4 levels of happiness that we pursue. The first is a physical level of happiness. So we eat and drink and smoke and have sex or whatever it happens to be to try to find happiness. And the reason people do that is because it's immediate. So they can satisfy an immediate physical need. The problem with that is if it's disordered, then it doesn't lead to happiness, it leads to sadness. So sure, I'll use a Hershey bar as a metaphor for all of the things that I just said. Okay, I want a Hershey bar. Should I have a Hershey bar? Well, it's somebody else's Hershey bar and you stole it. No, you shouldn't have it. So that's a problem. You have a Hershey bar, fine. But now you have 5. Well, it's a problem, okay? And when you have your Hershey bar and you expect that it's going to bring you to the highest level of satisfaction, and it doesn't, you now go down beneath where you started, and you need 2 Hershey bars just to get to the same place. And you start to get to a point where you can't have enough Hershey bars to find it, and you will either kill yourself, people do this a lot, literally, kill themselves in the pursuit of Hershey bars, or they say, I have to move beyond the physical realm to something else. And then you find them on Oprah, and they say something like, oh, I was an addict, or I was pursuing this from a physical perspective, and I was dissatisfied. So then I went to the level of accomplishing things. And I felt like if I could just accomplish something, if I could build something, if I could win a gold medal, make millions or billions, if I could become famous, if I could do something like that, that accomplishment will give me the satisfaction that I'm looking for. The problem is that it lasts longer and it's a better thing, but it can be disordered again. And as soon as we believe that we're going to find our great satisfaction in that, it leaves us equally dissatisfied because you can't win enough gold medals. You can't eat enough, drink enough, have sex enough to feel the satisfaction you want. You can't earn enough, be famous enough, or win enough to find that satisfaction. And you need more of it to get there and a greater high in that regard. So then it makes a person crash again. So they usually go to the 3rd level, which is philanthropic, and they say, well, you know, Oprah, I used to be an addict, and then I went and I became successful, and I didn't find great satisfaction, so I decided that I was going, give. And when I give, I'm going to feel better. Well, this is a great thing. It's a very good thing. All these things in order are good, by the way, okay? But when it becomes disordered now, you realize that you can't eat enough, drink enough, have sex enough, earn enough, become famous enough, build enough, or give enough before you don't have anything left. So again, those are good things, but then ultimately speaking, the existential idea is, hey, how did I get here? Why am I here? Where am I going? And why is it that, people who have tremendous success and have accomplished great things in life still find certain dissatisfactions? Why does Belushi kill himself? Right. Why did that happen? Why do all of these famous people with seemingly everything that everybody else wants find great dissatisfaction? Well, because at the end of the day, what I've learned, and I'll just say this out there, none of this makes sense without God in heaven. I mean, literally this whole thing does not make sense if there is no God and there is no heaven. And I'm not going to try to get into the debate with everyone. They can work through that on their own. I'm just going to tell you, in my own humble one-man opinion here, none of it makes sense without that. So the ultimate success is, listen, there's either no God, there is a God, there is heaven, or there isn't a heaven. There's really not an in-between type of thing. There maybe could be some versions of this people make up, but all it is their own personal desires, and they become God makers as opposed to responding to it. But at the end of the day, that's really where it is. And so why do I love that? Well, I love that because it puts us not fully in charge of what we can't be in charge of. There's nothing worse than a person trying to take authority they don't have, that they're not qualified for. This is when people become erratic in life. So if we're not qualified to make up the reality of the world, okay, and the fact that we didn't put ourselves here, and we either are accidentally here through random chance, or there is some sort of ordered divine being that either loves us or doesn't love us, but put us here. And so our whole pursuit then is the discovery of that. The hardest way to pursue that, people mostly pursue that as a God maker. They say, well, I'm going to tell God who he is. And as opposed to saying, I'm going to discover who God is in humility. And that humility is the only thing that allows us to have access to that. So, when I was younger, I would have not understood that at the same level, nor would I have the convictions. And I probably would have been too shy to even say it. But at the end of the day, all the other advice that people give short of that, it's good advice, by the way. I'll give you the first three things. Say, I can teach you how to make money, made a ton of it. I can teach you how to collect cool cars. I got a garage full of them. I can teach you how to build a big company and lead a bunch of people and all that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, somebody else earned more, did something bigger, wrote a better book, gave better advice, had a more interesting life. And the comparative idea of competing for these things as though they actually have some big long-term value is silly. By the way, they are good things. They are good to pursue. We need to be productive and to pursue good things and to recognize there's a value temporarily in these sorts of things. But as soon as we start to identify ourselves in them or believe that we are only as good as those types of accomplishments, as opposed to we are as good as we are in being, okay, we have a problem. But yeah, listen, here's one of the things that I've learned. The greater you pursue the truth about what happens after life, the better you are at living in today's life, and the more success you're going to actually have, because it makes you a better person. And who do you rather do business with, an honest person or a liar? A person who's sacrificial or not? Who would you rather have a relationship with, an honest person or a liar, a sacrificial person or not? So by default, we become more successful when we pursue what is good, true, and beautiful.
So the 4 stages of happiness he talked about when there can be disorder. What was the 4th stage? Is that you talked about the 3rd one was more like the legacy piece and giving back, philanthropic, right? And then the 4th. What's the
4th one is it's understanding. It's really an existential understanding. It's like to think as far out as we possibly can. So I'll give you a more earthly vision of it, and then I'll give you a bigger one. I'm certain you're familiar with the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Okay, he was a psychologist who was held captive in Auschwitz and went through one of the worst circumstances anybody can possibly go through. And he actually remained quite healthy. And the reason that he did was because he started to study who was surviving and who was dying. And some people had no choice because they were taken to gas chambers, Right. But others who did not forcefully get taken to their death and had to try to meander through the circumstance, the ones that did the best were the ones who had gratitude and would basically receive this paltry little 200 or 300 calorie diet in a day, but they would see somebody else hungry and say they need it more than me, and they'd give it to them. And ironically, the person who would give that to them would sometimes be healthier than the person who consumed it. And they also never stopped thinking about what will be. So they thought as far out as they possibly could. What will it be like when I'm home? Okay? And they constantly thought out as far as they could. These 2 things, gratitude, sacrifice, well, it's more than 2, but one of them is encompassing many. Gratitude, sacrifice, and serving, accompanied with thinking as far out as we can. See, it's so funny. You raise kids and you say, I discipline my kids. And sometimes they don't like the discipline. Most of the time they don't. We all act like kids when it comes to God, by the way. I don't like that you make me suffer. Why do you do that? Well, for the same reason you make your kid do their homework and eat right, because we want them to have a longer term, better thing. Okay? So these things are really an essential thing for us to remember, that this is happening to us just as we make it happen to people who we have authority over for their own good, not because we don't care about them. And why do you do that? Well, because you're thinking beyond 2nd grade and 3rd grade. You're thinking about when they're a full-grown adult that they are productive and good. And then when you take that over, that role yourself, you say, well, I'm going to plan for my retirement, and I'm going to eat healthy, and I'm going to do all these things to prepare for my retirement. Okay, well, when you're in your retirement, what about then? What's the ultimate retirement? Hey, when you're dead, there's either nothing or there's something eternal.
Right.
What's it going to be? So why would we spend time thinking about what it's going to be like when we graduate and we retire without thinking about what it's going to be like when we die? That's the furthest thing out. And it's also the thing that leads to the greatest level of mental and emotional health. Why? Because without thinking that through, we will have a certain anxiety about what it might mean eventually.
So is it mainly focused on, it's kind of like that having a life's mission or a life understanding your life purpose and kind of more of that mission based of the fourth level of happiness is living in a true alignment towards that mission? Is that kind of what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, it's very simple. It's this. It's so simple. I tell people, seek what is good, true, and beautiful. If we want to make this podcast great, we want it to be good, we want it to be true, and we want it to be beautiful. If you said, come listen to my ugly, false, bad podcast, nobody would come to it. Well, maybe there might be some people. But for the most part, we want what is good, true, and beautiful. These are the things that raise our soul up. So if we think furthest out and say, what is the best thing? Good. What is the most good, right? What is the most beautiful? And what is the most true? And then we say, I'm going to look at that in everything I do. I'm in a relationship now. I want it to be good, true, and beautiful. Okay? I have a job now. I want to do a good job. I want to speak the truth, do what is true, and I want to make it beautiful. When we pursue what is good, true, and beautiful, things work well. So if I have guys that are suffering, they've gone through a divorce, or they've made a grave mistake or error in life, and they have tremendous regret, I see 2 words to recover. Be good. Be good. And they're like, well, I don't know. I made this huge mistake and it cost me my marriage, or I made this mistake at work, or I was dishonest here, I did this or that. I said, well, listen, you can't change. Are you going to do it again? No, I'd never do it again. Okay, well, good. If you didn't have that opinion, we'd have a totally different conversation. But if you're already on board with, you regret it so you don't want to do it again, you can't change the past, but be good. And you will find that over time, you will be able to heal and mend virtually everything you've went through. And that there are people who, maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's a year, maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 20 years. You look at them and they seem to really have their act together, and you say, well, what did you go through 20 years ago? What did you go through 10 years ago? What did you go through 5 years ago, a year ago? And the suffering that they went through, sometimes self-inflicted, was absolutely horrendous. And you say, oh, and I thought I had a problem, but yet this person has recovered. How do you do it? Be good. Over time, that's the thing that matters. And you will, first of all, have a clear conscience. So if other people are still judging you based on your past, but you are good, you seek what is true, good, and beautiful, your conscience will be free, and you will be able to have the wherewithal and the stamina in order to get through more difficult things.
So how do you see the men that, maybe like yourself, or the men that you've surrounded yourself with, them transgress through kind of those phases? And I mean, I think be good, that in theory that sounds great, right? But is that just kind of like asking yourself different questions on what would the good version of me do in this circumstance? I mean, like, what does a day in the life look like in this, as you explain this?
So because we all have human nature, it's the same for all of us to a certain degree. But what changes it is our temperament, and we all have a little bit different temperament. Whether or not you're talking about Myers-Briggs, or you're talking about just the straight-up choleric, melancholic, sanguine, and phlegmatic, if you're familiar with those terms, we all have a personality type. There are 16 different personality types when you combine all these things together. Every one of our personality types comes with a natural set of virtues and a natural set of vices. So in the same way that, if I remember, you're 6'4", 6'3", you're a tall guy.
6'4", yeah.
6'4", okay. I am not. I'm 6 foot. All right, truth be told, 6 foot when I have shoes on. Without shoes on, I'm 5'11" and a half. But I never answered the question without shoes on. Not because I'm prideful, because I'm prideful. But so you're taller than me. Now, you can't take any credit for that. Okay? You can take credit for being in shape or whatever, or, taking a certain level of physical well-being and going someplace else or whatever. But, you can't take credit for being 6'4". It just happened. But you can take credit for what you do at 6'4". Some people have a greater natural intellect. Some people have a greater natural ability for art or music, certain inclinations. Our temperaments are similar in that some of us have a natural inclination to be motivated. We're more naturally motivated than others. Some of us are more naturally compassionate than others. Some of us abhor injustice more than others. Some of us are better communicators naturally than others, more fun to be around naturally than others, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not going to break down all the temperaments. I could give you the rhyme and reason between each one of these and how people behave in good versus not good environments and whatnot. But there's also natural vices. Some people are more inclined to immediate anger. Some people are more inclined to judgmentalism. Some people are more inclined to certain, vices, whether or not it's a gluttony or whatever it happens to be. So the whole objective is to tame our vices, okay, to bring them under control and to fortify our virtues. I am going to get into that a little bit because that's really the essential part of this. So I always tell people here, tame your want-tos and fuel your ought-tos. Well, what does that mean? Well, I want to have a Hershey bar. I ought to have broccoli. Okay, well, tame your want-tos. It doesn't mean never have a Hershey bar. Okay, sometimes you have one. But I ought not have two. So tame your want-tos, fuel your ought-tos. See, at the end of the day, success is simple. The greatest key to success, irrefutably, is to do what you don't feel like doing. Mm-hmm. That is absolutely the key to success. It's doing what you don't feel like doing. On the day that you go to bed, doing everything that you felt like doing versus everything you didn't feel like doing, you are going to have a much, much better day when you do what you don't feel like doing. I don't feel like doing my expense reports. I don't feel like working out. I don't feel like putting down the alcohol. I don't feel like this. I don't feel like that. I don't feel like holding my tongue. All of these things. I don't feel like making the extra phone call in sales, okay? But if we do those things, we can have success. The key to success is doing what we don't feel like doing. It's not doing what we don't like, okay? Because oftentimes you like to work out or you like people in your family and work and you want to be kind to them, but today you just don't feel like it, okay? So it's doing what we don't feel like doing, which is really an essential thing. You might like your job, but today you don't feel like doing your job. So we have to really pay attention to that. And then when we do pay attention to that, we start to build the virtues, which I'll get into too, unless you have other questions between.
Yeah, because I think that was the definition of success that I still to this day use. When I remember years ago, both in Cutco and in Best Version Media, and I think I understood it in theory, but it took I had to change a narrative in my own head of what discipline was and the discipline muscle, to where I just very often, and one of the reasons why I wasn't an amazing performer in either Cutco or Best Version Media, I was always kind of in the top quartile, depending on the month or the year or whatever, was because of this, in my opinion, is that I relied too much on talent and I had a weak discipline muscle. And I would call myself, I'm just not very disciplined, right? Yeah. And over the last few years, it's been me intentionally strengthening that discipline muscle by working through these conversations of doing the ought to, because I have broken it down into a bite-sized piece, and it's a daily thing, right? And it's not overwhelming for me to do it, So I'm kind of curious on, I do want to know what those virtues are, but it just kind of, as in weaving that into those virtues, and I assume that'll help lead you into where we're going. So
so this is a key thing. One of the worst things in the world that a person can do is to just succumb to their natural vices. Okay, so again, you may require a greater effort to be disciplined than a person who's naturally caloric. Okay, that person is, oftentimes it comes out in a negative way because when they are in leadership, they're like, well, you just do it. I just do it. I don't need to motivate them or coddle them. It's their job. Do it. Well, principally that's true, but effectively it's very bad. Not to mention the fact that most people don't have that hardwired thing. So they need some further encouragement, and that encouragement is an important thing to provide. So I think the first thing we have to do is we have to not beat ourselves up. When we beat ourselves up, we basically say, I'm just not that way. Okay? Well, not naturally, but you can be. Okay? Now, we can't be anything we want to be. This is a lie. Okay? If we could be anything we want to be, I would tell Rodgers, go sit down. I'm going to be the quarterback of the Packers. I got some work to do here. Okay? I couldn't do it. All right? I couldn't sing opera. If you wanted me to sing opera, it ain't going to happen. So that we can't be everything we want to be or anything we want to be, but we don't need to be happy. Okay? Because we have a certain amount of natural talents that we can refine into skills. And we can actually exercise the muscles of the will and the intellect to go from being undisciplined to disciplined. So I remind people that the virtues are actually the muscles of the will and the intellect. So you need to rehab your knee or your shoulder or your elbow, and you say, oh, and by the way, the number of people that go, I'm just done now. I have bad knees. Okay, I have a bad arm, bad shoulders. By the way, having been through tons of surgeries myself on all sorts of joints, I felt like quite often succumbing to that, but just saying I'm too young for this. I can't succumb to that. And what discipline can provide to build muscle around joints that are themselves weak is remarkable. I say this because your will and your intellect are the same way. You don't have to succumb to being undisciplined or impatient or these different types of things, or bad with money or bad communicator. You can actually do things to become better at it. So what are these? These are the natural virtues, the four most powerful natural virtues, aside from humility, by the way, which is like the neutron bomb of all good things, are prudence. These are called the cardinal virtues. The word some people think, oh, is that religious? Religions use this, but it's not religious. The word cardinal is not a religious term. It's the Latin word for hinge, meaning that all of the virtues hinge upon these four virtues. You can have no other virtues without these virtues. And the first one is prudence. Prudence is the mastery of decision making. It's really simple. Who would you rather be around? A leader who is great at making decisions, a spouse who's great at making decisions, a pilot great at making decisions, an accountant great at making decisions, or one very bad at making all these decisions? We all want to be around a person who can make good decisions, and we want to make good decisions ourselves. A financial advisor who makes good decisions, bad decisions. Wouldn't we all agree that really the sum of the weight of the decisions we make, good or bad, is the thing that will determine the outcome of our success? Okay? So it's super important for us to realize that we need to develop prudence. Now, when people just say that, it always frustrates me. It's like, oh, be prudent. That's like saying be courageous. Well, believe to achieve. I'm like, I remember when I was young, I was like, but I don't believe. And they're like, believe harder. I'm like, I literally don't know how to do that. Yeah, that's not working. So I like to give people steps on how to accomplish these things so we can get there. How do you actually exercise prudence? There are 3 steps. Desire what is good. We've talked about that. Good, true, and beautiful. Desire what is good. Know what is real. Good, true. This pattern is a pattern, by the way. The great philosophers have known this forever, okay? And we bury these things, okay, because we like to bury what is good, true, and beautiful when we are not good, true, and beautiful, because it makes us feel bad. And people's egos and self-esteems are so brittle that they would rather hide in the shadows of ugly, bad, and false than to be in the light of good, true, and beautiful. It's really simple. But you have to desire what is good, know what is real, and then pursue what is good. There's action in prudence. So if I was a baker and I baked cakes, the good thing would be to bake great cakes at a great price and pursue that. Make a lot of them, or as many as is necessary to satisfy the audience. So if I baked cakes and I was like, Andy, what do you think of my cakes? Bob, what do you think of my cakes? Jeanette, what do you think of my cakes? And you're all like, I hate your cakes, man. And I was like, well, you're tasting them wrong. Okay? Well, clearly, even if I desired what was good to make great cakes, I don't know it's real because I'm blaming the taster, which is impossible. So really what I need to do is try to bake the cake, and when you tell me you don't like it, I'd say, oh, okay, well, let me accept that reality, that truth, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go pursue what is good. The sticky wicket with this is that we're in a crazy world that doesn't believe in truth. Like, Andy, this is one of the most phenomenal things about young people today, and this started years ago. But they'll say things like, there is no such thing as absolute truth. And I'm literally like, is that true? And they're like, yes, that's absolutely true. Wait, there is no such thing as absolute truth, except that there is no such thing as absolute truth. And that's an absolute truth, which means, literally, how do you not know how ridiculous this statement is in the first place? So to claim there is no such thing as absolute truth is an absolute truth, which means it's not true, okay? So there is. And when people say, well, everybody can have their own truth, that is the biggest lie ever. And if we can have our own truth, it's totally stupid. If I love tomatoes and you hate tomatoes, and I say, you love tomatoes, That's my truth. My truth is you love tomatoes. It doesn't mean you love tomatoes. It means I'm wrong. Okay? It just means I'm wrong. It's not my truth. It's an error. The truth about me is that I love tomatoes. The truth about you is that you don't like tomatoes. If I'm going to be in the truth, I agree that you don't like tomatoes. If you're going to be in the truth, you agree I like tomatoes. You can't twist these things. And as soon as a person believes that they themselves are God, and by the way, meaning that they are the definition of all things true, they're going to have a screwed up life. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to spend their entire life trying to convince everybody else to see the world the way they see it, as opposed to what I'm doing. And somebody might, by the way, easily a person that adopts that philosophy go, oh, this Dave Durand guy is actually doing that same thing. He's trying to get everybody to see things the way I see it. I am only trying to get you to see what's true. So if anything I'm saying is not true, pursue what's true. Like, I am subject to what is true. If I'm saying something false, then pursue what's true. If I said something that's true, I don't own it. I'm not smart enough to come up with myself. I'm observant, so I'll see what other people have come across, but I've invented very few ideas in my own world. And if something that I said is true, then adopt it. Not because it's me, because it stands outside of me. Gravity is not my invention, but I believe in gravity. And if a person says gravity doesn't exist, well, you're subject to all the problems that falling include.
So I know that we have a lot to cover here and a limited amount of time. So for the men listening to this, you've covered 2 virtues. What were the other 2?
Great question.
We can cover in just a brief snippet, because I don't think we're going to be able to get the level of depth
that we'd like to. Okay, so
we'd
you
like
have
to here with each of these. So
I hear you. We talked about humility. That's kind of a foundational thing. But the cardinal virtues are prudence, and the next one is justice. You can't be just. To each their due portion, okay, if you're not prudent. A person who doesn't desire what is good, know what is real, or pursue what is good, can never be just. So this is a very important thing to remember. When you're around a person that can't make decisions or effective decisions, and then you want to seek justice from them, you're not going to get it. They might be lucky and come up with a decision that happened to be just, but it's circumstantial there. It's not actual, the wisdom of justice. So we need to know that if we're going to lead great people or become great ourselves, and we desire what is good, know what is real, and pursue what is true, therefore we start to master prudence, and that's a muscle you can develop, okay, that we will now become more fair. Then once we're fair, we can have fortitude, we can have strength, we can have grit, stick-to-itiveness, get through it. So a lot of people, they get online and they're like, oh, I need to get something done, and I just watched a great video from this particular person that totally me to be motivated and get this done and to be grit and to grind. So I did that, but I wasn't really pursuing what is good or true or beautiful, and I didn't get anywhere. I was like a motivational mess, okay? So we need to do that in order to properly direct it. So it's like taking the engine of an airplane and detaching it from the plane, and then lighting it on fire. That's what the whole idea of fortitude is without prudence and justice. It just wildly goes. So you might have some sort of like traction for a moment, but it explodes in the end, harming a lot of people. So then ultimately, if we have prudence, justice, and fortitude, we will also have temperance. The idea that we can resist temptation, to temper our behaviors. I ought to go to work. I want to golf. So I'm going to put aside golfing today. I'm going to go to work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I want to go to the bar and look at that woman, but I'm married. I ought to be faithful to my wife and go home and love her. Okay? Yes, and even things like that. So if we don't desire what is good, know what is true, and pursue what is good, we don't have a sense of justice or fortitude, can we really be faithful? No, we can't be. So that's why when people try to like build these things from the top down, it doesn't work. You want to really go after it. Start with humility, which is precision truth about yourself. That humility will allow you to enter into the cardinal virtues and say, I'm going to work on pursuing what is good, okay, knowing what is real, or desiring what is good, knowing what is real and pursuing what is good, et cetera, and build on top of each other.
All right, man. If you're listening to this, I think it's a good time to hit pause and re-listen to that, because I feel like it's one of the best things I can remember being displayed or explained on this podcast. So I just it's like a mic drop moment for me. So pause it and re-listen to that. I know we're coming down to like the last 5 minutes or so. There's still 2 questions that I want to get to with Dave that I've been asking each of the guests lately. So this has been phenomenal. So the first question, I bet it's an interesting segue, is what does it mean to be a man to you?
The greatest sign of strength for a man is humility and docility to the truth. The reason I say that is that if we have humility, precision, truth about ourselves, we will have incredible strength. And if we have docility to the truth, that means that we will be subject to authority, God in particular, okay, and live according to what is good, true, and beautiful. And that when we lead people in authority, we will do it with strength and compassion. So at the end of the day, we were made for a mission. And we need to be able to say, how was I made? I didn't make myself. Why did God make me this way? Did he make me a Ferrari or a minivan? Both are good. But if you're a Ferrari and you try to love like a minivan and pick kids up at soccer and buy groceries, you're going to be largely ineffective. And if you're a minivan and you try to enter the racetrack, you're going to be largely ineffective. Neither one is better. One might be more exciting than the other. But we have to ask ourselves, which one am I? And then we need to be docile to that truth. So really, ultimately speaking, men who are strong, are kind, compassionate, forgiving, filled with gratitude, not afraid to fight. The next book that I probably write will be Punch a Bully in the Face and 21 Other Things I Learned as a CEO. By the way, it's the 21st thing I learned. The first thing I learned as a CEO is love your people to success. It's just not nearly as cool a title. But there's a time to stand up and fight, too, and to defend what is good, true, and beautiful. See, when we pursue what is good, true, and beautiful, then when we find it, we will fight for it. We'll even die for it. And men are willing to sacrifice. So at the end of the day, I'm going to summarize it this way. To be a really strong man is to love. And people, I wish I knew this when I was young, but love is simple. To love is to will the good of the other. And then to know you love is there has to be sacrifice present. So if you really want to truly be a man, will the good of those around you, at work, at home, your neighborhood, and then prove it by sacrificing for them. And now you have really, really tapped into what it means to be a man.
I love that. And then another question that I ask each guest is to put your professorial hat on and give the men some homework. To where we've covered a lot of
my professorial hat.
Yeah. And basically give them something that they can do to improve their lives over the next 7 days and get some momentum towards some of the things we've talked about, on something they could do every single day to gain momentum on this topic of the seeking out this moving towards your mission and living a life of fulfillment and happiness. What would you say to a man over the next 7 days? Like, here's your homework to get some momentum.
It's a great question, Andy. I would say because we are physical beings with a mind, soul, and body, we need to manage all of these things. And we have a tendency to manage one over the other, which sometimes on a daily basis, on this particular day has to happen. But if we do it long term, we start to wobble. So I give the analogy of 6 spinning plates. You've seen the circus performer that has a plate on a stick and they spin it and they see when they can spin. Well, imagine 6 different plates on 6 different sticks and the circus performer is spinning them. These plates in our life are our faith, our family, our finances, our physical health, our social contributions, and our continuing education or vocation. That's on tape, so I don't have to repeat it again. Basically, if we neglect any one of these things, that plate will wobble and fall and hit the ground. And now you have to run over and pick it up and glue it together and put a new one up, or buy a new one. And when you're doing that, the other ones start to wobble and fall too. So we have to spin each one of these plates every day just a little bit. So I would say tomorrow, in the next 7 days, wake up on time, say your prayers, even if it's, I don't know how to pray. If there's a God, help me. Whatever it is, engage, start that. If you know better, do better. Secondly, eat right and work out. It does not mean that you need to have the beach body and you have to have a perfect diet, but pay attention to what you're eating and cut back a little bit on something bad, add something good, and move more. So you're exercising your faith, you're exercising your body, and then I would learn something. It doesn't have to be a long thing. See, the mistake that people make is they get so into something like this that they cannot sustain it. They have a diet they can't sustain, a financial program they can't sustain. The suffering is too great and they just have to get out of it and then eat the whole cake and stop working out for a whole month or whatever. So what I really recommend is you bite off a little bit of this, learn just a little bit more, okay? And then be better with everybody you're with, just a little bit better. And if you fail, start that moment afterwards and start again the next day. It's going to be filled with failure, but pay attention to each one of these things. If you relentlessly cut people off and flip people off when you drive, do that a little less tomorrow, okay? And if you pay attention to each one of these things, you will start to build momentum in your life that can be carried much, much further.
Man, I love you so much, man. Like the level of insight that in the little tiny package of the couple of decades I've known you just shone really bright here. So I want to honor you for the level of investment that you've made in the men listening today and just showing just a little bit of why I appreciate you so much. And I see you as someone who has a huge impact on my life. I wish we had more time, man. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrew. And by the way, to the work that you're doing to inspire men like this, very, very well done.
Thank you, sir. So, men, I will add on how you can get in contact with Dave in the show notes. So you can follow him on Facebook. If you can look him up or on LinkedIn, and you can pay attention to some of the things that he's doing.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Resisting Beta podcast. Here's where I need your help. I'd love for you to give us a review on your favorite podcast player. Also, follow us on TikTok and Instagram and share this message out to a man that needs to hear it, because that's how we impact this world. Thank you very much. Make it a great day, men.